Hey guys, let me know if you can hear me. Cool, thank you. All right, I'll give, I know it's 9, I'll give people maybe a minute or two just to join. All right, guys, I'll get started now. So this session, I'll be covering how to deploy ML models with AWS, right? So I understand that some of the sessions that you guys have seen so far have been using Colab. And that kind of doesn't really mesh well with the AWS interface. You would kind of have to create a new notebook in AWS and do it that way. But I've shared a link in the chat to a notebook, and it just kind of outlines the steps you would need to take in AWS, and as far as navigating the interface and stuff. And that's mainly what I'll be focusing on with this session. And I'll show you how to kind of deploy a model. So once you have trained a model, deploy it, get an endpoint. So endpoint is something that you can actually use to essentially serve predictions, right? So make predictions on some data. And then you can set up a Lambda function. I'll show you guys how to do that in AWS, as well as how to set up an API and an API endpoint in AWS. And with those two things and your model endpoint, you'll actually be able to get a URL to which you can essentially post input in a certain format, and then you'll be able to get predictions as a response, and you'll be able to parse that out. So I'll cover those things in this session. Feel free to post in the chat if you guys have questions. I'll try to come back to this every few minutes just to see if there are any new questions. And I think the content that I'll be covering about I want to say 25 minutes, and then I'll be free to answer any questions you guys have after that point. And if you guys want me to cover anything else in greater depth, I can do that as well. So I'm going to get started. I'm going to share my screen. So first, I'm going to show you guys first I'll be showing you guys the Colab notebook, right? So this is the Colab notebook, deploying ML models with AWS, cover some of the learning objectives. And this is the data that you guys have been using in some of the sessions so far. So these are it's the same CSV file. The only issue is we're not really going to be using that much in this notebook, just because to do a lot of what I'm going to show you how to do in AWS, you need to do that using an AWS notebook. I'll show you guys how to set one up in the AWS console as well. So this is just some code that shows you kind of how to get how to train a model, right? So what I'll be covering in this session is once you've trained a model, how to deploy it, right? And again, like I said, I'll be using AWS SageMaker. SageMaker is kind of AWS's machine learning training platform. So, for instance, I've outlined a few examples here. So for linear regression, for instance, if you look at the code up here, this is just an example. I don't think this will actually execute, but once you have a linear regression model trained using the fit method up here, then what you can do is you can just deploy it, right? The only caveat to this is that you need to use the SageMaker version of the linear regression algorithm. So what I mean by that is you actually have to, I don't think, I have it in my other example that I'll show you guys in a second, but you need to use, essentially SageMaker has its own library of machine learning models, and you'll need to use one of those. And then for that algorithm, the deploy method is defined, and that kind of, it ties in really well with the AWS infrastructure, and you can identify which instance type you want to use to deploy this model. So AWS has its own kind of machine sizes, and they have certain specifications in terms of like GPUs and other memory and stuff like that, that you will, if you have a much larger model, like a really deep neural net or something like that, you might want to provision a larger model. So you guys can kind of set that up in this deploy method here. Now, once you have once you do this deploy method, right, you get this predictor, and this predictor is essentially, if you do predictor endpoint name, you can get the name of that endpoint, and that's kind of what we'll use within the AWS infrastructure. That'll kind of be basically the address of our model. So then once we have our model deployed, this is kind of the architecture of what we'll be following. So we'll have our model here. We're going to create a Lambda function. This I'll show you guys how to do in just a second. And that's going to communicate with an API. And then our app, which is just going to be a web page for this example, is going to communicate with that API. It's going to, the input that we put into the website via a text box, for instance, is going to be communicated to that API. That API is going to then communicate with the model. It's going to send back a response, and that's going to be essentially how we're serving predictions onto the website. And the HTML code for this web app is going to be able to parse that response. So this is kind of how this architecture is going to work together. So I'm kind of starting off with the Lambda function, but I want to show you guys how to use Jupyter Notebooks in AWS first, since that is the real starting point per se. So I'm just going to check back for questions. Okay, none here. Sorry about this this page. It gets really trippy when I try to, because I'm also sharing my screen. Okay, so first thing I'm going to show you guys is the AWS Management Console, right? I've zoomed in on the text a bit, so it's slightly easier to see, but feel free to let me know if something isn't visible. And so this is like, you sign into AWS. This is your console. This is like the page you land on. So from here, these are my recently visited services. Everything we'll be covering is covered here. Just to kind of break it down, EC2, this is something you guys might be already familiar with. This is probably the most used AWS service. And then what is particularly interesting is services. So like SageMaker is one that I use pretty frequently. If you hover over it, it tells you kind of what they're used for. This is for building, training, and deploying ML models. I was exploring Amazon Recognition too. This is more for images and classifying them, things like that. And then S3. This is probably another very heavily used component in AWS. So these are like the different services or different products, so to say, that AWS offers, right? And so let's start off with SageMaker, right? So if you are starting off and you're creating a project, right, the first thing you would do is you would go into Notebook instances, right? And this is the notebook that I've created here. But yeah, I can open Jupyter and show you guys what it looks like. I'm sure you guys have used Jupyter Notebook before. It's essentially the same thing. And this is just like an instance of Jupyter Notebook in AWS's, architecture, right? Or sorry, infrastructure. And so what you can do is, let's say you're training something really heavy and you want to allocate more memory or more GPUs to a particular instance of Jupyter Notebook. You can specify the resources that you want to allocate to it when you're creating the notebook, right? So you can select from, these are like different like AWS machines that you can configure, and then the instance name, and this is the IAM role. So IAM, I don't remember exactly off the top of my head what it stands for, but this is basically how permissions are allocated to any service within the AWS infrastructure, right? So, so I've created a custom IAM role. I gave it the ability to execute Amazon SageMaker. So that's the permissions that I've allocated for the notebook that I'll be looking at. So SageMaker deployment, this is in Jupyter Notebook. I can go to projects and SageMaker project, right? So the project I'll be covering today is it's an IMDb movie review sentiment analysis model, right? So it's essentially it reads the there's a Stanford, it's an open source data set that I'm using here. I train a model to determine if a movie review has a positive connotation to it or a negative connotation, right? So it's just a binary classification model. And I won't get into too much about how to train, but I will share the link with you guys to this notebook. It's on my GitHub as well. But I'm going to start off with once the model is trained, right? Since this session is covering deployment. So once our model is trained, like I said, we're using that deploy method. As I said earlier, we're specifying the instance type, the initial instance count, and we're basically creating a predictor. And this predictor is going to be where inputs are going to get sent to. And that's what's going to be serving a prediction to our API. And our API is going to pass it on to our web page. So this is that step where estimator is the, if I scroll up a bit, yeah, so so this is the estimator. I'm explaining like, the parameters here, just, what kind of PyTorch model I want to train. I'm fitting it to the training data. And then once I have the model trained, this is that training step. And yeah, what I like about AWS is that, it kind of shows you when it's starting the training job, it's kind of walking you through the time sequence of events. And then this is where I'm deploying it, right? So deploying a model is actually the easiest step. The hardest step, or not the hardest, but I would say a slightly more difficult step, that model to serve predictions and kind of laying out the groundwork for that. So, so we've deployed our model here. And scrolling down a bit further, this is just covering testing. This is actually, it comes after as well. Deploying. Yeah, so I'm just doing the same thing again. I think I tried to deploy a few different types of models. Okay, so this is where I think we can start with. So we have the model deployed, right? So that's predictor. And we're just testing out some IMDb reviews, right? So I just created a function that's test reviews. So it basically goes into this, this is the data set. So I set aside some data for testing purposes. And this function essentially, it starts testing the positive files and the negative files that have, the reviews that have positive or negative connotations to them. And then this is just kind of measuring the accuracy using sklearn metrics, which I think which was covered in a previous session. And this is our predictor. Again, it's very simple. You just use the predict method, and yeah, it kind of gives you a metric on how how our endpoint is working. The number here is, I believe 1 corresponds to positive, and I believe 0 corresponds to negative. But we can cover that in the web page or the HTML file that we'll cover later in the workshop. So once we have our endpoint working, this is the architecture that I was covering earlier in the oh, I should probably zoom in on this so it's a bit easier to see. Okay, so this is the architecture that I was covering earlier in the Colab notebook, right? So you have your model, Lambda function, API, and then it's being served to the web app. So when we run that deploy method, this is the first part, the model that we kind of have working now, right? So next step is going to be setting up this Lambda function, right? So yeah, I have some stuff written here about the Lambda function, how to set it up. Okay, so like I mentioned earlier, the IAM role. Oh, sorry, I didn't mean to do that. Just run. Okay. Yeah, so the IAM page, we need to create a role for our Lambda function that we can use to, the policy that it should have is Amazon SageMaker full access, right? So I'm going to show you guys how to do that now in the AWS console. So we go to AWS. If you just click on the top left, go to services, it brings you this page of all the services, or alternatively, you could just click that AWS at the top left and it'll bring you to the main page. So from here, you can go to IAM. Excuse me. And this dashboard kind of shows you an overview of how many roles you have currently allocated. And so what we want to do is we want to go to roles and we want to create a role, right? So you can see here, I already have Lambda SageMaker role, and I'm just going to show you how to create that. So you go to create, we're going to select AWS service, and the common use case we're going to pick is Lambda, okay? Then we go to permissions, and from here you can kind of search. These are all the different permissions. So we can search for SageMaker, and we want Amazon SageMaker full access. We go to tags next. This is optional, but you can add IAM tags. And this is where you define your role name. So we could do Lambda, what do you call it? IAM role, right? So I've already created a role. So I'm just going to hit cancel, but this is how you would create a new one. Okay, so we have our Lambda SageMaker role. So let's go back to that, the notebook, right? So we've created an IAM role for our Lambda function. Now what we're going to do is that Lambda function. So the IAM role, just to rehash, is to give the Lambda function permissions. And now we're actually going to create the Lambda function. Just to pause for a bit, I'm going to go back to the notebook, see if anyone has any questions. Nope, we're good. Okay. All right, so now we're in the create Lambda function step, right? So we're going to go back to the AWS console in just a second, but there's a Lambda page, and then from there, we're going to create a function. We're going to say author from scratch, and we can give it, like a function name. And we want to make sure that the Python 3.6 runtime is selected. That's just something that's specific to this project that I'm showing you guys. It might be different for your project depending on how you created it. And a Lambda function is essentially, at the very core, it's running some code, right? So this is the code that we need to copy. And all this code actually does is just, so you can kind of see, it goes to the endpoint that we specified earlier for our machine learning model. Remember when we have our model and we do deploy, that predictor, if we do predictor.endpoint, we get an endpoint name. So let me, yeah, it's right down here. Okay, so this is where that code is. So sorry, we had our model, we did deploy, we had a predictor. Now when we call predictor.endpoint, it gives us basically the name of that endpoint, and this we can just copy and paste into our Lambda function, so that the Lambda function knows that it'll invoke this particular endpoint. And we're specifying the content type, the body, and this is the input basically that's going into that endpoint. That's the input. So the input here would be an IMDb review, and then we're parsing out the response, right? So the result, response body, we're reading it, decoding it, and then we're serving it, right? So this is the return for this function. So what we can do is, I won't copy this because I already have a Lambda function declared, but I will show you guys how to create a new Lambda function from the interface. So from AWS, scroll down to Lambda. It's under compute, and yeah, so I have my sentiment analysis function. I'm just going to go ahead and show you guys how to create a new function. So I'm going to do author from scratch. I can give it a function name. So just to show you guys an example, my function, you can choose the runtime here, right? So I'm going to use Python 3.6. So 3.8 is the latest that's supported, and other supported, I can go down, scroll down and select 3.6. And I believe they still support 2.7 as well. Yeah. So if you have an older project for Python, you can have that supported as well. The default execution role, right? So this is why we created our IAM role, so we can use an existing role. And this is Lambda SageMaker role. It essentially gives it full access to Lambda SageMaker to actually call that endpoint, which is what we're going to be doing in this function anyways. And yeah, that's essentially it. So I'm going to hit cancel because just to what I'm going to show you guys next, I don't actually need to create a function for. Once you've created your function, you're going to be brought to a screen like this, right? Once you click on it, it essentially shows you up here, it shows you if there's a trigger for your function or not. I've already set up the API gateway, so that's why it's shown here. When you initially create it, it'll just show you the sentiment analysis function or whatever else you've chosen to call your Lambda function. And if we go to lambda function.py, I just need to double click it. Yeah. So here, this is actually the code that I was showing you guys earlier. I've already copied in the endpoint, but basically this is just, you just copy paste it here. So this particular Lambda function is hitting a model endpoint and getting the response back. You can create a Lambda function for virtually anything, right? Lambda functions are actually really powerful and actually pretty cheap as well as far as AWS costs go. So if you guys do have some time later after this hackathon, definitely check out Lambda functions. They're really powerful tools, and yeah, they're really great. So right, so this is the model endpoint. I walked through this function earlier, so I won't repeat it, but essentially we're just feeding in some input data to the model, getting the result back and returning it, right? So that's what this Lambda function is doing. Once we've made changes here, there's an option you can go to File and Save. And then when you initially create your Lambda function, you're actually gonna, this deploy box is actually gonna be orange. So like if I make some changes, yeah. So it turns to orange and it says changes not deployed when you initially create your Lambda function. In order for your changes to actually take effect, you're gonna have to hit that deploy button, and that's gonna make it, it's gonna make your changes take effect. Sorry. Right. So that's the Lambda functions in a nutshell, for our purposes at least. And if we go back to the notebook, we've set up our Lambda function, and now we need to create that API gateway, right? So now that our Lambda function has been created, we're gonna be serving, our API gateway is actually gonna be how our web page is gonna communicate with that Lambda function. So API gateway is gonna trigger that Lambda function that we just created. So Amazon API gateway is another, you can select it from that AWS, from the menu, and you can create a new API. And I'll walk you guys through this, through how to do this, right? So let's go back to the AWS Management Console. We're gonna scroll down to API Gateway, right? Networking and content delivery, API Gateway. And from here, yeah, so I've already created this sentiment analysis API, but I'll show you guys how to create. So you choose an API type. I believe we're going to be using REST API for this one. Yeah. And you can give your API a name, a description, and endpoint type, regional, and you want to do new API, right? So once you've created an API, then you can modify it, similar to how we did for our Lambda functions. Once you create it, and you click it, you'll be brought to this interface. And now from here, so this is a method that I've already defined, but you can create a method. Okay, right here. Yeah, so you can create a method. We're actually going to be creating a post method for this, but it doesn't show up because I've already defined it here. But yeah, so just to show you guys, these are some other options you have when you're creating an API as well. So once we create a post API, we can specify edit method documentation. Go back here. Okay, from the integration point. Deploy API, right, okay. So edit method documentation. This is not what I wanted to do. Okay, so this if you look at this workflow, right, it kind of shows you what this API has been designed to do. So this is our client, and the client is essentially going to be the web page. The web page is going to make a request to this API, and then that request is going to get sent to Lambda proxy, right? And this is our Lambda function here, Lambda sentiment analysis function, and that request is going to come back as an integration response, and that method response is basically going to be sent back to our client. So this is just a picture of an API. And as far as setting it up, I have the instructions here, and they're in the Colab notebook as well. But if you guys just kind of follow through, I walk you through the different steps you need to walk through in the AWS console to actually create a Lambda function. So yeah, if you guys follow this along, you can't go wrong. The last step in creating the API gateway, this is something I can cover, is to actually create a deployment stage. So if I go to deploy API, I've already defined prod, but you can select new stage and you can name it something like test maybe, and then that essentially creates that deploys it again to and it'll give you a different URL, like an API URL that you can then put on your web page. And if you have like different environments, like you have production, test, dev, you can kind of handle that with the environments that you're deploying it to. Okay, so that was API gateway. Now, if I go to this API, these are gateway responses. Okay, so this is the API settings, the interface that I'm looking for. Okay, so once our API is deployed, it gives us that URL, which is what I'm looking for. Sorry, for some reason I'm struggling with this part. It's under APIs. Okay, I'm just gonna create a new API because I do remember how to do that part there. So let me just validate the type of API I'll be creating. All right, so let's just test API, new API we're creating. This is regional. Let's go to create API. Actions, we're going to first create a method. It's going to be post. We hit the check mark. This is the integration type Lambda function. And we want to use a Lambda proxy integration. This is just like best practice. It's a good way to do it. And then from here, we need to specify the name of the Lambda function. So yeah, sentiment analysis function. It kind of pops up there once you start typing. And this is the default timeout. So if we hit save, it essentially says we're going to give this method access to our API. If we go to deploy API, we can do a new stage like test, deploy it. Okay, and this is the interface that I was looking for. Okay, it's under stages. So, so this here is important, this invoke URL. This is the URL that we'll need to copy, and this is what we're gonna put in the HTML code for our web page. And this is how we're gonna be sending input and getting responses, essentially communicating with this, with the API gateway, right? So let's go back to the notebook. So we've covered how to create this API gateway and set it up. Now we're gonna be, I'll be showing you guys how to actually deploy it in like an HTML file, right? So let me just open up a sample index HTML. I want to open with Sublime, right? Okay, so I apologize if this is really small and hard to see. Let me try to change the, I think it's under view. Okay. Let me try this. I'm just gonna pull this up into. Okay. Sorry, this is a very unoptimal way to showcase this, but yeah. So just to show you guys a little bit better, so I can zoom in on this web page. Sublime doesn't let me zoom in for whatever reason, but okay. So format HTML. So this is the HTML for the web page that we'll be showing you in just a second. There's essentially like a title up here. It's very basic. There's nothing complex to it. And the most interesting part of this, how we're actually going to be communicating with our AWS API gateway, is actually here. So this is how, so again, the method that we declared when we were creating our API gateway was the type was post. So we're creating a post API, and this is the this is where that URL goes, right? So, and then from there, the URL is gonna, we're gonna send our input to that API gateway, and then we're gonna get back a response, and we're gonna parse it, right? And this is actually where we're parsing this function right here, how we're parsing that response. So if the result is equal to 0, that means that our review was negative, right? So 0 corresponds to a negative review, 1 corresponds to a positive review. This is just a binary classification model, and we're not really scoring it. It's just 1 or 0. Excuse me. And then this result element, danger or success, I think it's just the color. I think red means danger and green means success. So yeah, I'll make this available after this session as well. I'll post it in the chat. Okay, so that's the HTML file, right? So what I can do now is I can open that HTML file in my browser, right? So this here file, this is my downloads folder, index.html. And from here, I can type in a review. So let's say bad movie. And if I hit submit, this is actually going to take the input that I just typed in here, send it to the API gateway, send it to the Lambda function. Lambda function is going to get, we're going to send it to our model, get a response, and then relay it back to here. And then this web page, the HTML code for this is going to parse out that response. And the response was 0. So, we see that the review was negative, and danger is, a red. I'm actually red-green colorblind, so I can't really tell. But that's just, a negative review. I said bad movie. It's very simple. And good movie, we should get a positive result, right? Yeah, positive. And this supposedly has changed to green. So that's very simple, right? It's just good or bad is a very common keyword. So let's try this out with a real review, right? So I've opened up the IMDb page for Attack on Titan. It's a really great show. You guys should check it out after this hack. But now one of the reviews, user reviews, right? So this review by Billy Bob Staple says absolutely fantastic, gave it a 9 out of 10. And there's quite a bit of text here, right? So it says, I'm not much of an anime buff. He kind of goes on, talks about some things he liked in the show. So let's just copy this and let's put this into our input box, right? So if we hit submit, we should get that our review was positive. We're actually not going to notice any change in the page since it was already a positive review. But let's see if there are any negative reviews that we could use. Wow, these are actually, see if I can sort by helpfulness. I want to, okay, let's filter by 1-star reviews. why do people watch this? Says Alad D. Williams Smale. Okay, so let's open this up. Okay. This is a really bad review. Wow. All right, so let's put in this negative review and we should get back that it was negative. So this is, you know, from the surface, it looks very simple, right? And a lot of websites that we visit, if they have a feature like this or, you know, any kind of interactive components of the website, we often, you know, kind of take it for granted. But this session hopefully just kind of shows you guys what actually goes on behind the scenes and how to set something up. And this is really simple, right? As far as the user interface of it goes. But yeah, you guys can, you know, make this look nicer or, you know, add some more like, you know, color to the web page or whatever. But just to kind of show you guys what goes on in the background and how, you know, how this all kind of comes together. I'm just going to end on a positive note. So let's pick up a good review and put it in here. And hopefully this gives us that the review was positive. I picked up a 9-star review. So yeah, hopefully this session was helpful. I'm going to stop sharing my screen for a moment. So if you guys have any questions, you know, please let me know in the chat box. Yeah, and I hope, you know, after this hackathon, you guys can all check out Attack on Titan. If you guys haven't already, it's a great show. I really recommend it. Oh, let me make some of the material available from this stuff I covered in this session. So let me go to Google Drive. And upload a few items. Okay, so file upload. I want to upload the HTML file. What else? And the SageMaker project. So just disclosure, this SageMaker project is from a different program. It's from the Udacity Machine Learning Engineer Nano degree. So if you guys, you know, after this hackathon, if you guys want to hone your machine learning skills, you guys can check that program out as well. I did it over the summer in 2020 when there wasn't much else going on. I also recommend that program. But yeah, so I'll just post a link to that notebook from GitHub so you guys can follow along. SageMaker project, IPYNB. Yeah. Okay, so it's from my personal GitHub. So that's the notebook link for that project. Check it out if you guys have some, you know, spare time. If you run this as is, it should just execute. I have some instructions in a README as well. One thing to note if you are running it is that SageMaker has been updated to like version 2.0 or something, and this project was created using 1.7 or 1.2. So there is a version compatibility. So you're going to have to declare explicitly which version of SageMaker, the library you're planning on using. So that's just a footnote. But yeah, hopefully this session was helpful to you guys. Thanks again for joining, and happy hacking.